I'm Meredith Blackwell, and I'm here with a crew from North Carolina State and two other mycologists who are Van Cotter and Mark Kubetta, and we are here on the grand occasion to interview Mel Fuller. And Mel was a mycologist that I looked up to for many years, and he was the person who did beautiful microscopy, and I can remember his presidential address for the Mycological Society. Do you remember it?
Very well.
And he stood on a stage. I don't think there was a podium or anything. And he showed pictures behind him and it was perfectly timed. You remember that? Who did that for you? There was a film of Kittredge swimming.
I made that with a graduate student.
Oh, it was gorgeous.
I had stopped smoking the year before, and he smoked every time we sat down to work on these pictures of all these fun movies, really. Mm-hmm. And I was smoking again, but I got rid of it right after that, and that was 1976.
It was quite pre-digital. But anyway, it was the most beautiful presidential address I ever saw.
Thank you.
Now, I wanted to ask you, I read in a biography you've done for your children, autobiography I could call it, you have told about your days of working in a shop where you stole all the coupons from the cigarette packs.
I did.
Okay.
I don't know what they were about or what they were for, but I thought they were worth something. So every time not only did I open up one carton, I opened up all of them and took the coupons out because we were selling them by the package to the students.
Okay. Okay, so let's start back a little bit earlier. And why don't you tell me a little bit about where you were born and where you grew up and some early experiences?
Well, I'm a maniac. I grew up in Livermore Falls, Maine. I was born in the house that I grew up in. I probably started out being pretty stubborn even in early days. One of the things you did in Maine in those days was you had baked beans every Saturday night for supper, and I refused to eat them on Saturdays. So my father would send me to bed, and I'd stay there until my mother at the next day brought me some lunch or something.
But no baked beans on one night?
I'd eat them any other night, but I refused to eat them Saturday because that's when everybody else was eating them.
Okay. Okay, so then your parents, what did they do?
My father was a plumber. My mother, with 5 children, was at home in the early days. We had a garden. We raised a couple of pigs and cows and some awful chickens that flew every time I had to go in there. And
did you have to slaughter the animals?
I didn't have to, but we had a slaughterhouse, and the things went there because we always had bacon and everything in the winter, and then a large garden, plowed in those days with horses. But
interesting.
It was my father built a greenhouse for us, so she raised a lot of flowers and so on. But
so I'm assuming your parents didn't go to college.
I was the first one in the whole family who ever graduated from college. I think all the families of my mother and father, but I later had two brothers, and
but you were first. Yeah, that's interesting to me because that struck me as something that was very different from what I would have thought when I interviewed. I guess we interviewed 33 mycologists before you, and it turns out that many of them, like John Taylor, his parents had never been to college. Lynn Boddy. A number of very prominent mycologists, so it's interesting.
Well, the thing you did in Livermore Falls when you graduated from high school is went to work in the paper mill. And again, I said, I'm not going to do this. My father said I couldn't afford to go to college, so I got 3 degrees and an honorary degree to put him in his place. So,
and did he live to see that?
I'm not sure it made any difference to him.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so tell me about your high school days and how you got to grad school eventually.
Well, in high school, I was in the pre-college program, and I think probably the most useful course I took in high school was typing, since I could always touch typing and made things go faster. But I mean, it was a fabulous high school, and I had great science teachers and so on. And a lot of my spare time, I never played sports, but the coach insisted that I had to come and manage the baseball team and the football team and all these things. And so anyway, that's how I first got the name Mel instead of Buddy, which I was glad to get rid of.
Can't imagine.
So then my father told me I couldn't go to college, and I said, I'm going. I went, worked in the bookstore where and the guy that I stole the coupons from, the head of the bookstore, asked me if I had done this, and I said yes, and he said, well, then I'm going to make you manager of the store you worked in last year. And I then went on to manage a bigger one. And that's really how I paid for college. I was lucky.
And where was that?
That was the University of Maine, and then I went to the University of Nebraska for graduate school. And I actually worked on a fungus called Neurospora, which a lot of people have heard of.
Yeah, I think so.
That was the first and last time I worked on it.
I think people have won Nobel Prizes based on Neurospora.
Well, you don't get them for chytrids, although maybe somebody will for the one on frogs.
The frog chytrid, yeah. But if they give them in physiology and medicine, it's not likely. Yeah. Okay, so eventually then, well, who'd you work with at Nebraska?
That's what happens when you're 88. Okay. I don't remember his name. He was terrific. He really was. He was a student from Cornell who had worked with the famous mycologist there, and I think he really synced the idea that I wanted to be a mycologist, but I didn't want to work on the fungi he'd worked on. I had a love from way back at the University of Maine when I was sent out in the middle of the Stillwater River to get some ice and see if there were any fungi in it, and I got water mold. So
in the winter,
in the winter, even so, there was spores there somewhere.
So you melted the ice, is that what?
I melted the ice and baited it with hemp seed. And
so they must have been frozen.
They were either frozen or had enough something that they could handle a freeze.
Didn't know about that. So then you went to...
I went to the University of Nebraska from there and worked on trimethylarsine production in Neurospora, which was, I don't know why I was growing it, and it smelled like crazy with this stuff. And there was an article about some woman working in Italy, and the wallpaper paste apparently was infected, and this fungus was involved.
Yeah, is that the one that produces arsenic and people get poisoned?
Trimethylarsine, it was eating or using as a source of carbon, probably, the arsenic and wallpaper paste. And as a result, that made trimethylarsine, and that's what was poisoning people.
Yeah, I think they thought for a long time Clairbout loose.
Yeah, that's who it was. I couldn't remember.
But then I think they found it was something else, actually.
Really?
But people are known to have
That's
been
what they
poisoned.
thought it was when I did it, and that's why that's why I went on to study the production of it.
I think it did work. And then somehow you got to Berkeley.
Well, that's interesting, too. I got to Berkeley because when I finished the master's degree, I was going to go to plant pathology to work with a physiologist who was very good. The summer before, I worked for another person in plant pathology, and then the department head told me that I had to do my degree with him. I couldn't work with the person I went there. And again, that maniac came to life, and I went to the University of Michigan to the meetings and met Emerson, that I admired very much and had read lots of his papers and so on, and said, I'm not happy. And he said, well, I have a job. And so I went there to take care of his culture collection.
culture collection's still going.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Well, you've been there much more than I have recently.
John Taylor was hired
Yeah, I know that.
to curate the collection, and I know that people still get material there.
That's good, because a lot of the stuff that's in the National Type Culture Collection is not there anymore.
Yeah, no.
I mean, that's one of my real sorrows, is that, but I'm glad to.
Yeah, the ATCC collection's
Now,
kind of
John
gone
is
down.
retired now too, so.
Yeah, but he's still working. I think he has grant money
Well, he's
for
got
a couple
money
more
and,
years.
yeah. Couple of years, he tells me, but I don't believe it.
We'll see. He's never there. So you got your degree working on chytrids.
No,
Or
it wasn't a chytrid. It was
Hypochytrid.
Rhizoidomyces, which is a hyphochytrid, and which is now, I guess it's put with the
algae.
algae, which is where the two-spored fungi go, like Phytophthora and so on. But I still call them fungi.
Yeah. You and Bartnicki Garcia.
Does he still call them fungi?
Oh, yeah. He won't give
he
that
worked
up.
on it, of course.
Yeah. He's the one who showed that all this stuff was wrong. He's the one who gave us the characters, the carbohydrate walls and materials.
Well, Rhizoidomyces has chitin in it, so
Yeah.
and I don't know if you've been reading the New York Times about the fungi in the Antarctic, but
Yes.
that's
The very early one,
one of the things
billion
that
year
puts them a billion years
Yeah.
earlier than they thought, or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people were saying a billion years for fungi, but now we can extend it further back, because surely they didn't find the first fossil fungus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you're keeping up.
Barely.
New York Times?
I
New
have a
York
good
Times?
friend who was also on the faculty at Georgia, who's here, who was head of biochemistry there, and
Who is that? He worked with wood.
David Puett.
Porter?
Puett.
Port.
No, David
no,
Porter's up
he's
in
not.
Maine. He
That's
was,
what I thought. He went back to Maine and
Yeah.
stayed, unlike
Yeah.
you. Yeah, I was thinking of the Scandinavian man who was at Georgia, who worked with wood decay. Yeah. But that's not David Porter.
Okay, I know who you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's not living anymore. He's a good friend of ours, but
he was a nice
don't ask
guy.
me his name.
Yeah, it started with an L. Anyway, okay, so let's go on to Berkeley. I made a list. There's a really great history of the first 100 years of botany at Berkeley. So
Great.
what that makes us wonder, is there going to be a second 100 years?
Well, the same person won't write it.
No. So Emerson was there when you were there, and I was concerned about who some of these other people worked with. What other mycologists were there? Because there are people that weren't working on things that I thought Emerson would have
Lee
overseen.
Bonar was there, and he was a Basidiomycete person, but I don't think he had any students.
Yeah, I don't have any students down.
Well, there was one lady in the herbarium who worked with him, I think.
Isabel
Tavares, yes.
Yeah.
And, but not very many students, but a wonderful person, and
Yeah, because Bob Gilbertson and I, a few years back, maybe 30 years back, started doing a genealogy of mycologists, academic genealogy. And I don't think we have Bonar with any students. I'll have to check again. I should have done that.
Anyway, Howard Whistler arrived back in Berkeley sometime in March. I mean, and he was portrayed to me by Emerson as an absolute genius. And in later life, I think he was an actual genius in what he did with Coelomyces and other fungi and so on. But he was coming back from Air Force service in Italy.
Oh, that's what it was.
This guy was going to be a genius, and we were all going to have to wake up and get with it and so on.
Were you jealous?
And it turned out that Howard, of course, became one of my best friends, and I eventually wrote his obituary, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Too early.
I remember I edited it, and one of the things I wanted you to have in there was about how you had appointed him as chair of an MSA committee. But
Is it actually bigger now than, is it almost the size of that page?
Yeah, huh?
Well, you see,
now it's online.
Well, you know,
do it
one of the
online.
things that I object to about the Mycological Society is the fact that you are a centennial fellow in the British Mycological Society, because you and I
That's
made
right.
it the same year, And I can get the journal, I get all this sort of stuff, but the Mycological Society of America, even though I was a distinguished one and all this president, doesn't make that thing available to you. And
I know.
I'd like,
Well,
I probably couldn't understand most of it, but I'd like to see it.
Well, let me tell you what.
You can tell
I
me.
can give you my password and let you get on the journal, but what might be better is if you could speak to the upcoming president of the society, Mark Kubetta, who's here. We'll let you talk to him later. And he might be able to do something
good.
about
Well,
it.
I just think that former presidents and people that I don't know what kind of an honor I got, but something
Distinguished mycologist. Right.
that
Well, let me tell you something. When I became secretary of MSA, I had a huge collection of the newsletters. Dr. Alexopoulos, my advisor, had started the newsletter. He did that as secretary. He did all kinds of things. And so one of the things that he did was keep up with this, with the dues, and he, because it was secretary treasurer in those days. So he had this newsletter, and I read through all of them so I could be a good secretary. And one of the things I read was that people who had been president of the society were supposed to have a lifetime membership after that in free journals.
Well, that's what the British gave us.
I know. Yeah, that was a fun meeting.
And I went to the online copy because I didn't want, but they would have given me initially they were sending me the paper edition.
And I told them I wanted the online, and then I didn't bother to get the password set up because I was using them through LSU. But guess what? All the British Mycological Society journals are done by Elsevier. And LSU and a number of universities in the United States are cutting out all their journals. They're just too expensive.
Take up too much space.
Yeah. So let's go back to your career. I remember that your first job was at Brown.
Yes.
Ivy League. You were in the Ivy League. And that was a good place for you because you'd been in a fraternity, right?
Well, and I have a wife from Rhode Island.
Oh, okay.
But
she was happy.
Actually, Brown was a wonderful university, and the only problem it had for me was that it had 3 people in plant biology.
Oh.
And
too few.
now Wally Snell was there. I don't know if you've ever heard of
the baseball player.
Well, Wally Snell was one of the great bull mycologists also. And,
but you know that he was a baseball player for
yes,
the St. Louis.
Somebody, I don't remember
St. Louis,
that.
I think.
But anyway, he was retired. In fact, I was replacing him, which was impossible. But anyway, it was if Brown had had more people in the plant sciences, I would have probably stayed there because I loved the place, and that's where I have an honorary degree because you couldn't have tenure at Brown without a degree from Brown University.
That is very strange. Okay, so you got to Brown, and I read that you had a Damon Runyon grant.
When I arrived, which was unheard of.
What in the world was Damon Runyon doing, giving out money? he was gone by then.
Damon. Well, it was. I think it was even the Cancer Foundation or something. It was. But I don't know, and I don't know. I don't even remember what fungus I got it for. I think it was probably something about chitin, because I had done Ralph Emerson when I was a student at Berkeley had set me up with a person in agronomy who was doing X-ray diffraction, and that's how we proved that there was chitin in this fungus,
as well as cellulose.
As well as cellulose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting because just the other day I'm trying to find a book my granddaughter, who's a math major, will read, and I thought maybe she'll read Damon Runyon stories because I always thought they were very funny. And then lo and behold, I see your CV and you've got a Damon Runyon Foundation.
Yeah. I arrived with it and made the local newspaper.
Wow. Amazing.
They sent somebody and presented it, and that was the old days when it was easy.
But then within a few years you had NIH and NSF money too.
Yeah.
Which was amazing. 3-grant guy.
Well, and then later in life, I had a lot of Sandoz
Oh, yeah.
Sibagagi.
Yeah, you went over there and worked, didn't
Yes,
you? With
yeah.
the antibiotic that kills selectively?
Well, I worked with actually, I worked. That was way at the end of my career, but
Okay. So you went several times.
I went there to a meeting first. They had a meeting in Switzerland, and I met one of their people, a man named Giese, and decided to go back there on sabbatical.
Okay. So you left Brown for...
I left Brown and went to Berkeley as a visiting professor, and
Was that common for Berkeley to hire people from...
it was common for Berkeley to hire people with a degree from Berkeley.
It was.
And as it is in a lot of major universities, I was there really just Emerson was on sabbatical. They had several candidates. Bob Embry was one. I was one. I don't know who the others were. Anyway, I was asked to stay, and I really would. That's when I would like to have gone to Santa Barbara. But once Santa Barbara found Berkeley was considering me,
They cut you off.
They can't even touch you, and so Berkeley offered me the position, and I stayed there 5 years. I guess it was it.
And I have been in the house you owned in Berkeley, but not when you lived there. It was when Russell...
Not Russell Malmberg,
Russell,
whatever his name was. He bought the house.
Stephen, no, Russell. But anyway, Russell bought that house, and I just thought it was wonderful. So you must be a kind of fan of modern architecture, because I was in your house in Athens, Georgia, and it was kind of the same. Very beautiful houses.
Well, I probably am more colonial than...
Really?
But actually, I like modern.
Yeah.
Most people don't like the new entrance that they've just made here. It's a little sterile, but it's modern, and my kids come and they think it's beautiful. My wife thinks it's awful, but anyway.
Well, okay, but I just thought
yeah,
you were a fan of contemporary architecture, but maybe not. So
I sort of like it too, if it's
Okay.
well done.
So what made you leave Berkeley?
It's a story I like to tell and I don't like to tell. I mean, I left really because I was in Ralph Emerson's box. Ralph was my very best friend. I mean, as you know, I did a book in his honor and so on. But I was in his box. And particularly, even though he was in the National Academy and so on, when I had 7 students and postdoctorals and he had 2, it was really, and I was getting it, I got invited to the Spore thing, that the first one they had, I think, in England, and he made comments about the lady who was in charge of mycology there, derogatory comments to all the graduate students, and I thought, at some point, I thought I just have to leave, and I had several possibilities. I could have gone to Tennessee as a liaison between the Oak Ridge and the university. I chose Georgia. I lost 52 pounds moving to the south, and
that didn't happen.
Yet it turned out it was a very good choice, and I thought that was the end of my career in mycology. It wasn't. I even had John Taylor as a postdoc. So
John had asked me to ask you, how did you build up a program with so many mycologists in the botany department?
Well, you know, there were a few other mycologists there. There was Hanlon,
when
Luttrell,
you started,
and so on. So there was a real basis of people coming, and Dick Hanlon and I sort of crossed over. I mean, I would teach the course in the beginning mycology one year. He would teach the other. Most of my students came there as graduate students. I had very few.
You mean the ones
I guess.
from Berkeley?
Well, I took 7 people, I think, when I left Berkeley or something like that. But some of them were very far along in their degrees. But then postdoctorals like Brent Heath.
Oh, I didn't remember Brent.
Brent was a postdoctoral. So was John Taylor, of course. Many, I had a bunch of them. You've got the list somewhere.
Yeah.
You'll have
yeah.
to look at it when you get
I'll
home.
send it to you. Okay, so that...
Harvey Hoke was a
Yeah.
postdoc.
Okay, so talking about Brent reminds me about asking you how you came to electron microscopy, because it was a very new field then, wasn't it?
Yeah, just at Brown, I had a good friend who was in the zoology department, and he was the head of the EM laboratory, and I spent some time with him. By the time I got to Berkeley, I don't know. All I know is that's what I did.
That's
I had
when you
done
really-
a lot of marine mycology when I was at Brown, because there was a beautiful ocean right there, and I don't know how. I really didn't know much of the technique of except looking through the.
You mean you had someone to fix your material?
I hired somebody who knew how to prepare material, and we did have to do some variation because the fungi we were working with were very sensitive to some of these things. But
so what about what kind of microscope did you have?
well, we
Was
had
it a
had a
German?
Siemens in the thing, and interestingly, NIH gave me a Zeiss microscope, and when I decided to leave, Berkeley said they're going to keep it, and NIH told them that if they did keep it, they would give me the money that somebody at Berkeley would get, so I could buy another one.
They threatened
So
them.
quickly it moved to Georgia,
Okay.
and unfortunately it still stayed in my name. So when we sold it to Yale, I had $14,000 or something like that I had to get rid of, and I gave it to the university because it really shouldn't have been in my name.
Yeah, yeah.
So now I'm a member of the President's Club for life at the University of Georgia.
Okay, now the other thing I'm curious about, and I know Mark Cabetta is too, is about the symposium you had to honor Ralph Emerson. And Ralph was very ill at the time,
Yes.
and so sadly he couldn't get to the workshop. It was a workshop, not a symposium.
It was mostly a workshop, about a week.
I attended,
Yeah.
and it was wonderful.
Well, a lot of it was due to Larry Goriloff, and you probably don't know
I
much
know,
about
I've met him,
Larry.
but
Was one of the probably most brilliant students I had. But he's now back in Pennsylvania, I think, and is doing well in a smaller school, and has had a very good career, I think.
Good. Yeah, everything, just, the zoosporangia popped, and we
Yeah.
saw zoospores swimming around. It was fantastic.
And actually, the university Georgia paid for me to go and present the book to Ralph. It was in honor of Ralph and Ed Cantino, who had also had died by then, or
I think he had.
was certainly.
Yeah, and one of the things, the book that accompanied it was just wonderful because it told you how to grow all these things and gave you the day on which you should start the cultures and all, and how many hours, and it was really something.
Yeah. Were you the one who told me there was somebody I could give that book to? Someone in Martha's place?
Well, I don't know that I would give it away because, well, it was reprinted, right? It was revised.
No,
it never was revised?
No, but it sits in my closet. And
Okay, well, let me tell you what.
I'd like to get it to somebody who might work with these fungi.
Let me tell you, 2 days ago, I looked on Amazon, and there is one copy available. Guess what it's selling for?
Don't have any idea.
More than $8,500.
Are you kidding?
No.
Well, I'm not going to buy it.
I don't know. I don't know that anyone
I don't
will,
want to put.
but-
I would rather give mine to somebody who I don't think it's.
Well, I think we can take care of it at the MSA auction. It would be someone who would really use it.
That's a good thing, yeah.
And I buy them whenever I see them and then give them away. But you started a printing company for mycological books.
I wouldn't say I started a printing company. It was a very well-established printing company.
Southeastern Printing?
Publishing, and they did a
Okay.
lot of things. And I don't know how they got me involved with some other things, but anyway, when I did the two books, the first one.
Zygomycete.
Well, the three books. Yeah, actually, there were two on zoosporic fungi and one
Okay.
on the zygomycetes that I edited, but.
Yeah, that zygomycete book, maybe you don't appreciate it working with chytrids, but there was not much on zygomycetes in English. And so
well, it was a good company to work with,
Yeah.
and and I think that was, I mean, that kind of thing was the way Emerson taught people to handle fungi, to make them do things that students could enjoy.
Yeah, and they were collections of things that weren't collected, or in collections. I mean, book collections. Not you didn't have to look up individual papers anymore. So I want to ask you about a man called Elani. Elani, A-L-A-N-I. He was at Berkeley. Was he before you? You don't remember the name.
The name doesn't.
Okay.
Elani.
I think he was from Pakistan. But anyway, I was just curious about him. He's someone I've known of, but never.
Did he work on fungi?
Yeah, yeah.
No,
I think he ended up doing medical mycology, maybe for the state of New York or something.
No.
So I was looking up all the people there that I'd run into, and some of them were much earlier than you. People like Calvin Macmillan, who was at Texas when I was there.
Well, Calvin was
ahead of you several years.
Was he at the University of Nebraska, or I had him somewhere as a teacher?
Well, he may have still been teaching. He finished at Berkeley in '52. So I don't know if he would have stayed on and taught some labs
I graduated
or something.
from University of Maine '53. He must. I think he must. I think he was at Nebraska.
Okay.
No, but there was a taxonomist. He was an ecologist.
And Richie Bell was there. Paul
Richie
Silver.
Bell, of course, came here and started the botanical garden.
Yeah.
Is he living? Probably not.
They were all Berkeley people before you. Let's see.
Richie Bell was there on a sabbatical while I was on the faculty.
Okay. Carl Quist was there. All sorts of really well-known people.
Well, I know
Stone.
Carl Quist also.
And one of my favorite teachers of all time taught me electron microscopy methods. Well, it was cytology, really. Howard Arnott. Did you know Howard? He worked with
Howard
Yucca.
very well. He was a graduate student when I was there. And was he at Texas when you?
Yep, he was, and went on to Tampa, and then he ended up at Texas, Dallas, Fort Worth area. But anyway, he was one of the best teachers I've ever had.
That's interesting.
He made you show him, that kind of teacher. I don't believe you. Show me. And then Jerry Aronson, who ended up at Arizona, right?
Arizona.
Yeah.
In fact, Arizona State, I think.
Yeah, you're right.
That's
Arizona
where
State.
Robbie Robinson is now. And
yeah. So who did Jerry work with? Did he work with him?
Jerry worked, I think, with Mackless. He worked for me for some time while I was at Berkeley, but not as a postdoc. But I think he didn't have a position at the time, but or came back there. I don't know. I don't remember the details.
Okay. And then in '59, it's Mel Fuller and Keith Harrison, Otto Solberg. And what's unusual in your class, there are two other people. And one of them we've mentioned was Isabel Tavares and Jane Ulrich.
Jane?
Ulrich. That was her married name, so I don't remember the maiden name. But what's unusual about that is there were actually 2 out of 5 were women. And
well, there was Janet Stein. I had a
later.
Yeah, well, but even in '63, though, I don't think women were even equal in '63, and they're not today probably in many people's mind. But it's getting better.
Yeah.
There was Janet Stein. I had Barbara, whatever her name was, who's listed on that thing as a postdoc, who was on the faculty later at University in British Columbia.
Yeah, that's where Janet Stein was too, wasn't she?
Janet was there, and Janet wasn't a student of mine. She was in algae, I think.
Okay, so, and then '61, Whistler graduated. Howard.
Howard, yeah, he finished
So
a couple years after I
yeah.
did.
So he had been in the Army.
He
or
was in the Air Force. He
Air
came
Force.
back about toward the middle of the end, while I was still working for Emerson
Okay.
in his
Yeah.
laboratory. I mean,
The smart one.
Maintaining the collection of cultures then, because we didn't have a person that
Okay, well, was he on the GI Bill? Do you know?
probably, I don't
Because
really know.
Tennessee,
He should have been.
Ron,
Yes, I know who you're talking about, but
Peterson.
yeah.
Ron Peterson has been very interested in all of the mycologists who came back on the GI Bill. Emery Simmons was one,
Yeah.
Bob Gilbertson.
Is Emery still living, do you know?
No, Emery died about 5 years ago.
He and I did the second international congress.
Yeah, and that was
together.
another thing I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you about. There's been, for the last 2 years, a search to see if the International Mycological Association ever had filed papers with the government or anything, so that they were official.
In this country?
Yeah, or anywhere. And
I don't believe Emery and I did.
No, you did it for the Congress in Tampa.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember Emery wrote about that. He's written a history of the early days of the IMA that's
Well,
online.
have you got that on your computer?
Yeah, you want
Send
that?
I would like to
I'll
see
send
it
it.
because I enjoyed working with Emery a
Yeah.
lot. And
Yeah,
I-
Emery became a good friend of mine. And
Yeah.
in fact, I went and kind of closed down his lab
yeah. Well,
after he died.
after that, we were good friends for the rest of my career and
Yeah.
probably, we both got beautiful bottle of vodka from Russia when we did that Congress. They let one person come to the International Mycology Congress from Russia, and she brought 2 bottles of vodka, and I don't know.
And you got one.
We got one of them, but she did it in secret. She didn't want to have it identified in any way, but I
Yeah.
think I can tell it now.
Okay. So then I was going to ask about, was Jimmy Clark in school, or did Jimmy, he was there after you probably?
I think probably. Was he mycology? He might have been working
Yeah,
with...
he worked with Ray O'Neill Collins.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think he replaced me.
Collins did.
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Alex was his major professor, and I'd see Collins' picture on the
Yeah.
wall. Dr. Alex had all the pictures on the wall, and he told Ray that he would probably never get a really good job because of his race. And here he ends up
Yeah.
at Berkeley better than any of the rest of us. So that was really, really nice.
Well, that was good. That I did one good thing by getting out of there. I
Yeah,
guess,
you made place for Ray. Unfortunately, he died very early.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah, yeah.
But you know, when they hired John, they interviewed 4 people. 2 of them were my postdoctorals, and one of them was Larry Goriloff, and they hired John. So I felt pretty good. I don't know who the
Yeah.
4th one was, but
wasn't yours. Huh?
it wasn't mine.
Yeah, it was funny. The other day I was looking for John. Well, when they had the retirement party for John at in his department, I was looking to see if I could find that original job ad, because they wanted someone who could do everything. And so this person was to be expected to do the culture collection, have graduate students, teach undergraduates, get grant money, and on and on and on. I think there were even some arboretum duties. And so I thought, who in the world will fill that position? And John got it, and he's done very, very well.
I think John had the outlook that went for mycology. I mean, even though he just wrote me recently, or told me recently, that the paper he did with me was one of the most cited papers he'd ever had.
So anyway, I think, Frank Gleason, did he work with you?
Frank Gleason did not work with me, but we've become fairly good friends in later life. No, Frank is a very good mycologist. He comes to visit me every year.
Oh, that's nice. So then the other person, who's one of the first mycologists I ever met at a meeting, was Bertie Held. A. Held.
Bertie was a student of Emerson.
Okay.
went to some place in New York to college.
Yeah, it was
and
like Hunter College
Hunter
or one
I
of
think
those.
And I don't know what happened to Bertie much after that. He went into other areas, I think, because he didn't continue with zoosporic things.
Well, I remember him playing the piano, I think.
Really, I never knew that.
I think he was born in
Germany or
Israel.
Israel.
Well, it was Palestine, actually, I think, when he was born. I'm not sure, or maybe it was his mother. But he had one of the neatest titles for paper I've ever known. I always remembered. I had to write it down. But it's something about naked endoparasitic fungi which dress up like their host. And so it's about Roselle.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he was an Emerson student, and he was very, very capable. But he apparently must have gone into something else, because there's not much, unless you know a lot.
I never saw him at another meeting after
Yeah.
that. So that was years ago.
Well, I would tell them they better get some chemistry and things like that, and I would tell them to look at the zoosporic fungi, because nobody else is these days. When Martha Powell and Joyce Longcore gone, and these fungi have been forgotten, except for one that suddenly became a parasite because it lived on the skin of animals that breathe through their skin. But I guess I would say to high school students, isolate fungi, bait them with hemp seed, or if you can't get hemp seed anymore, find something else to bait them with. But I think just seeing fungi do what they do, and particularly when they swim around, that they're even, to me, more exciting. But even so, I mean, mushrooms and so on, I think too frequently we try to teach. Molecular biology is very, very important. I'm not doing that, or DNA for relationships and so on. It's told us a lot about the fungi that we didn't know. But the students in high school ought to be looking at organisms and so on. And I've worked with several of them after I retired in a high school in Maine. But that's my feeling, that looking at living organisms.
I couldn't get that to happen in my department at LSU. They have to start out with all this chemistry,
yeah,
which
well, this
you need
is
to
what,
pick up. You
this
need
is what,
it,
and that's why it bothers me that in today's world, there isn't anybody who knows some of these things. And Joyce Longcore, who's at Maine, who took over the frog thing, has gotten international recognition, because she was with Sparrow earlier and knew how to isolate these things, and has every paper that you see. I mean, she's acknowledged on
That's
it.
Right.
And people like Martha Powell. I don't know who's out there that has this. There may be some.
Martha had a student who's quite, what is he, near retirement, actually.
Yeah, well, I mean, David McLaughlin was a student of mine, and he really was a fan of Wally Snell, but Wally was retired, and David, I sent him off to McGill to work with Charlie Wilson, and he came back to Berkeley to work with me. But
that's interesting.
I sent him to Michigan to learn something, because I don't know mushrooms other than the ones I won't eat.
Well, he's done quite well.
And when Brent Heath left, he went to one university, and his wife went to the University of Toronto. So
he was nearby, though. Carleton. Not Carleton.
No, it's...
but it's right there.
It's become
York
University, right,
Yeah, and now he's off doing something called coursing, I think, where you ride big horses and go across the country.
Well, they had a house in British Columbia.
Yeah, that's where they went.
And I don't know if they went there to live. David McLaughlin had a house that he built, he and Esther built on the coast of California, but they're about to sell it, I think.
I know, you keep up with everything.
All their kids are in Florida, and so Minnesota gets kind of cold in the winter.
They bought a place there in Coral Gables, I think. So.
Well, when I retired, I gave a lot of books most of my books, but I dictated then that they go to what was then the Fuller fund that I turned into the Emerson Fuller Whistler Fund.
Oh,
Well, there wasn't anything in honor of Emerson, and so we're a trio as far as I'm concerned, of similar thinking.
well, that was good thinking.
And anyway, John Taylor got geared up to make it even bigger, so because there was enough money. So initially he wanted me to donate another $1,500, but it ended up that we both gave another $500, I think.
Oh.
So, but it's got the fund up where the society wanted it to.
Yeah.
Except they put mine into some other totally different thing about basidiomycetes or something, and I finally got them to move it to the proper
Okay.
place. So,
Yeah, I'm glad they started naming these funds. It used to be, there was supposed to be a biography of each person.
well, it was, I don't even
That
know
was
who,
given
some of
to
my
the
students
students.
must have done it, but anyway.
Yeah, no, that's what was done. But I was going to say, we used to get a biography of the person to give to the student who won it each year. Yeah,
and,
no.
And Howard's does a lot
Howard's
of it too.
is really good. I like it. And there's a picture of him fishing, as I remember. Trout fishing? Did he trout fish?
Well, I don't know. I have a number of pictures of Howard.
But the one that was published.
We used to go out collecting in the swamps of California or something, and Howard would be right in there in his boots